Well, Downsview, it is a rainy Tuesday morning, and I greet you this morning in God's name and want to share a few moments of devotion with you here in our touching base time. Speaking to you from our quietness of my vehicle here. It's a rainy morning. We're heading back in from camp later today and to continue the work of God. And days like this, I'm not sure how they hit you, but if you're anything like me, there's a certain solemnity, I don't know, a certain reverence, a certain, excuse me, a certain kind of focus that rainy days lend themselves to in the sense of some contemplative time. It's, I wonder, sort of those kind of pondering what the day's about and what's going on because, there's so many things you can't do when it's raining out. You just gotta just focus a little bit. And Paul David Tripp, whose ministry I'm very appreciative of and have been going through part of his study on hope in the midst of suffering on our Wednesday evening Facebook Live. If you're interested in those, you can just look back on the same YouTube channel. You'll see them on the Wednesday evening recordings that are there. He has a little book, A Shelter in the Time of Storm, that I've found very helpful for a number of years now. And he quotes Psalm 27, verse 4. And a couple of his thoughts I'd like to share with you. Psalm 27, of course, King David is being pursued by his enemies. And he says, in the midst of that, one thing I have asked of the Lord, that I will seek after. There's one thing that I want from God, and that's the one thing I'm seeking. That I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in your temple. David says there's one singular thing when everything else is kind of pushed to the sidelines, and when I'm focused and when I'm in this contemplative state, thinking about what do I really above all want. I want to be where God is. I want to live where God lives. And I want to look and I want to learn. I want to live where God is. I want to look at God and I want to learn about him. He says, I want to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and inquire in his temple. I just want to be where you are. I want to stare at you and I just want to learn more about you. It's interesting. That's how I think about my wife. I just want to be where Pamela is. I look at her beautiful, beautiful face, the beauty of the wife that God has given me. And I just want to learn more about her, how I can frankly please her and find more of my joy in bringing her joy. Well, I think there's something like that in a connection with not a romantic, but certainly a love relationship towards God and Christ himself. And Paul David Tripp mentions about this in such a contemplative time. He says, it's an incredible statement, not one that I'm sure I could even honestly make. He said it's even made more powerful when you realize that this is written by a man who was under attack. His one thing isn't safety, vindication, or victory. His one thing isn't power, control, or retribution. No, even under personal duress, the one thing that David wishes for is to be in God's house, taking in the grandeur and glory and the beauty of the Lord. He says this desire is designed to be the central motivating desire of every person created by God, made in his image. And yet, on this side of the Garden of Eden, it seems a statement that only could ever be made by a deeply devout human being. And so he says, as we ask ourselves this morning, it does beg the question, what's your one thing? What's the one thing your heart craves? What's your one thing that you think would change your life? The one thing you would look for satisfaction, contentment, and peace? What is the one thing that you mourn having to live without? What is the one thing that fills your daydreams and commands your sleepy meditations? What is your one thing? You are heading back to a week after a long weekend like most of us have had. And you're bummed because, the weekend's over and, the summer's over. And, school's starting up again. The kids are going back. And notwithstanding coronavirus restrictions, it seems like we're moving in a direction out of this and to some level of normalcy and some level of sameness and the way it used to be. In the midst of that, it's a good question to say, what's the one thing that brings me joy and contentment and satisfaction and peace? And if it's the one thing that you don't have, is that the thing therefore you're going to strive for? I mean, of course it is. If there's one thing I want, and that's the one thing I'm going after. Friends, the Lord Jesus Christ has made us to find our peace and our contentment, lack of anxiety, in the fact that we are pursuing Him. We're pursuing His likeness. We're pursuing what it is to find ourselves in a right, proper, the way we've been designed relationship with Him. And so there's something about a quiet, rainy morning. My neighbor's pulling in behind us there, as you can see, and just think, what is it that we're really seeking and striving to live for, to gain, to have, to enjoy, to what is it? What is it that, the way David says, look, in the midst of some of the most horrible conflict I've had in my life, what's the one thing that I want in the midst of that? The beautiful thing about being a Christian in the promise of the gospel is that when we want the right one thing, we're going to have it. When you delight yourself in the Lord, He will give you the desire of your heart. That's when. And frankly, friends, there's times that we need to reorient those desires, refocus them again. It's just on Jesus-esque stuff, not just on churchy stuff. It's just on religious stuff, not just on spiritual ideas, concepts, but to remind ourselves of the personal relationship. And that's almost a lame way to put it nowadays, but to actually have a relationship, connection to, communication with, a eagerness to be with the King of the universe, the one who's been pleased to promise His presence to those who ask it, the one who's been pleased to promise salvation to those who seek it, the one who seeks, or at least tells us to seek, a living relationship with the living Christ by faith, by surrender. And some of us, friends, that might be still a new thing. And on a day like this, the beautiful contemplative morning, to think, all right, Lord, enough already. I've been skirting around the edges of this for too long. Help me to close with Jesus. And if you've closed with Jesus already, then the prayer just simply is, help me be closer to Jesus in a way that really does bring a sense of worship to Him. Because above all else, I just want to be with you, Lord. And I'm glad that even this side of the grave, that's a beautiful relationship that we're promised as His people, His sheep, hear His voice. And so I pray you'll hear His voice today, dear friends. I pray that as we walk through another day of a lot of uncertainty, that we'll find ourselves resting in the certainty of the relationship we have with Christ. One thing, let's strive for this day, that we can live with Him and look on Him and learn about Him. Cheers, friends.